Today is the first in a series of 5 videos in which I make my Christmas costume. This year I was really inspired by the bright, vibrant, colorful steampunk Victorian world of Jingle Jangle on Netflix, which I highly recommend you go check out. So I designed this sort of green and red, very Christmassy, bright, steampunk kind of 1890s look. I'm going to be making it one garment at a time throughout the week. And today we're starting with the shirtwaist. It's the least colorful piece, but we'll be ramping up in colorful throughout the week. And by Christmas Day, you'll get the final reveal. So here's the look I'm going with. It is a fantail skirt with some pleated trim at the bottom, a little jacket, a vest, a shirt, and a little hat. There's some detail on the back of the jacket with some pleating. So here's the fabric I'm using for that shirtwaist that we're making today. It's just a basic off-white cotton. And I'm going to be making a pattern on it by attaching these tiny, tiny little cogs. And then I've got this ribbon to trim the skirt and the jacket. And there's the fabric for the pleating on the shoulders, back, and hem of skirt. And there is the main fabric for the skirt and the jacket. And there's the fabric for the vest. This is a like 70s wool. It's great. And then there's the red, which will be the back and lining of the vest, and also the bow tie. Alright, to start on the shirt, I will be patterning all of the, putting a grid for the cog pattern on all of the cutout pattern pieces before I start sewing. I won't be sewing the cogs on until I have already done all the sewing near a certain area, because I don't want to have to worry about sewing around little metal discs, but I want the pattern on there while it's flat so that it is easier to mark. These pens can be tricky, so if you want to use one, definitely test your fabric extensively to make sure it's going to come out all the way, which I did on this fabric. Then I'm ironing the front button plackets on. I'm just top stitching along the edge of each of those plackets. Then I'm just sewing those darts on the front of the shirt. And I'm pressing those darts. There's the back piece of the shirt, and I'm sewing the shoulder seams. Most of the seams on this shirt are finished as flat felled seams, so you sew them, iron out the seam allowances, trim one down, and fold the other one over it and top stitch it down so it's totally encased with no raw edge. So that is what I'm doing for these shoulders. Getting the collar stand all ready, just ironing up the seam allowance on the interfaced piece. Then I'm stitching around the edge of the collar, trimming down the seam allowance, and ironing it flat. Then I'm sandwiching the collar in between the collar stand pieces, pinning all the marks, and stitching around the edge of that. Did a little bit of adjusting just because I wanted to make sure that those two corners were exactly the same. Then trimming down the seam allowances and turning the collar out and pressing it. Now I'm adding it to the shirt. I did adjust this collar, it was pretty narrow, so I needed to adjust the neckline on the shirt as well to accommodate the new collar size. Checking my instructions there. This pattern is by Black Snail Patterns on Etsy. I'll link it in the description below. She has really great patterns for several different historical eras. The instructions are really clear. It even had instructions for if you needed to let out the collar, what parts of the neckline to trim down. Very good, well-written patterns. Now I'm just stitching that collar stand on. Then notching the seam allowance so it'll turn out nicely on that curve, and pressing it all flat. Then I'm folding down the interior collar stand where I'd ironed up the seam allowance there. Wanted to make sure that was the step that she wanted me to do now. It was. And then just fell stitching that down by hand. Now I'm sewing those side seams shut. They are also finished as flat felled seams. Alright, unfortunately my camera was not recording when I got all these plackets prepared for the little sleeves. But they are just a shape that is ironed in a lot, basically. And then you just top stitch them onto the sleeve opening. Forgot to edge stitch that one before stitching it on, so I had to go back and do that and repin it. These are the shirt cuffs. They're prepared similarly to the collar stand, where you iron up the seam allowance on one edge to hand stitch down later. So I went and did that. And then ironing them flat. Now I'm sewing gathering stitches along the top of this sleeve and the sleeve seam, which is also finished as a flat felled seam. It's a little trickier, you kind of have to tunnel your way through the sleeve with the machine, but it's totally doable. Then I'm pinning the cuff onto that sleeve and sewing it up. There you go, nicely finished sleeve. Doing some whip stitching down by hand to finish it off. Now I'm just sewing the sleeves on. As you can see, I've gone through and added some cogs to the areas I won't be sewing on anymore, like the collar. I don't have any footage of that because I had to do it at my job, and I cannot show you footage taken at my job. So, it's just little hand tack stitches. There we go. One finished sleeve. And then here is finishing up that hem at the bottom of the shirt. It's just a very simple, tiny hem. And then I'm stitching that hem down. Now I'm getting those buttonholes going. I just did machine buttonholes. There are, I think, 13 buttonholes on this shirt. 7 down the front, 2 at the neck, 2 at each wrist. Now I'm pinning the front together, marking where the buttons need to go, so I can start stitching those on. You may notice the cogs are not all sewn onto the shirt. I do not have enough time to finish it up. I'll be finishing up all of the visible parts for this project, and I'll probably add the rest of the cogs on sometime early in the new year. Come back tomorrow to see me make the skirt. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw and want to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see what I was up to yesterday, that video is linked on the screen for you.